Welcome to the 94th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Sean Chercover, an award-winning mystery and thriller writer and the author of the new novel, The Trinity Game. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Sean Chercover. Chercover's latest novel is The Trinity Game. We're conducting this interview at Thriller Fest in New York City. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Jeff, for having me here.
Sure. Well, if the listeners haven't heard about The Trinity Game yet, could you describe the novel?
Sure. It's a it's a new thriller, at the start of a new trilogy, actually. And Daniel Byrne is an investigator for the Vatican's Department of the Office of the Devil's Advocate, and his job is basically to investigate claims of miracles. And in over 10 years working there, he's traveling the entire world. He's never actually confirmed a miracle. He's debunked them all, and he's a very good debunker. And his latest case is somewhat different, though. It's his estranged uncle who raised him as a child, who is an American televangelist. Daniel was raised on the 10th Circuit, traveling town to town, and he knows that his uncle is a con man. He knows that this can't possibly be a miracle. But it seems that his uncle, Tim Trinity, has come into this power of prognostication. He slips into tongues, he speaks in tongues, and if you record the tongues and play them backwards and speed them up by a third, he's actually speaking English. And he's making predictions, and they're coming true. But how can this be?
Great. Well, The Trinity Game has somewhat of a bigger canvas than your earlier novels, Trigger City and Big City Bad Blood. Can you remember the idea that kind of prompted the Trinity Game?
Well, yeah, actually, I've been carrying this idea around with me for a long time. 1996 was when I first had the idea, and I was waiting for shoulder surgery. I needed shoulder surgery, and so I was hopped up on painkillers. I was on Percocet, and I was drinking scotch in the bathtub, and I had some insomnia because of the shoulder pain I was in, and I spent a lot of late nights watching these televangelists on television. I thought they were hilarious, especially when they do the speaking in tongues and all that stuff, and the ones who are very clearly con artists. It's always, sow a seed of faith, make a vow to my television ministry, and God will work miracles in your life. And so I was sitting in the bathtub one night with a glass of scotch, and it was the first time this had ever happened to me. This character of Tim Trinity came to me fully formed. I knew him. I knew he was a non-believer, and he was a con artist, and yet that this manifestation of whatever it was happening to him, that he was actually predicting the future, and all of that came to me as a set piece, and I knew about his nephew who was sent to investigate him, and it was the first time I'd ever had a character. Usually, you spend a lot of time at the beginning going, who's my protagonist, what does he love, what does he hate, what does he fear, and you start working all these things. What does she want most in life? And you do, or at least most writers do, and I usually do, you'll write long memos to yourself. Sometimes you write conversations with the imaginary character to try and flesh them out. This was the first time a character had come to me fully formed, and I just thought, I have to write this. But that was 1996, and it was 14 years before I finally actually wrote it.
What prompted you to finally write it?
I think it was... when a story just keeps calling back to you, and you keep thinking about it in your downtime after that many years, then you probably should write it. And I was in a place where I wanted to try something. My first two novels were private eye stories set in Chicago and written in the first person, but I wanted to try something that was, like you said, on a bigger canvas, something that was multiple points of view, and where I could play with these ideas of things that are they miracles? Is it quantum physics? Is it, is it supernatural? What's going on here? I had all that stuff in my head that I wanted to play with, and finally it couldn't stop thinking about it, and so I thought, well, I better write it down.
That's great. Well, as you just mentioned, your first two books were private eye books, and you actually worked as a PI in Chicago and New Orleans.
That's right.
As many people probably know, the real life work of a private investigator is much different than kind of the fictionalized version.
Thankfully, yes.
And books.
Yeah.
How did that experience, though, as a real life PI, influence your writing of your first two books?
It influenced me a great deal. It was great. It doesn't teach you to write, obviously. Yeah. But what it did for me was it taught me a little bit of the way that people in that world communicate with each other. there's that gallows humor that cops and firefighters and ER nurses and private eyes all have because they see so much misery all the time. But there's also a sense that information is the coin of the realm. In some books, the private eye goes into the policeman's office and he says, "So, Lieutenant, I got this case. What can you tell me?" And the cop says, "Well, let me open the book and tell you all about it." Well, in real life, that's not true.
Yeah.
Nobody gives information as power, and nobody gives it away without getting something of value in return. And that was big for me. And another thing was the sense of resolution. In many of the books, it all gets resolved and the bad guys all go away. But in real life, you have a job to do, and your job is to get what your client needs, which sometimes is money, sometimes it's evidence to go to trial, to prove their innocence. But once you've got what you need to serve the needs of your client, the case is over. Mm-hmm. And you may... Mm-hmm. And you may know that there are other bad guys involved that it would be nice in a perfect world to bring them to justice, but your job is over. And so things don't get as fully resolved in real life as they do in the novels.
Right. What initially drew you to writing novels? Have you always wanted to be a writer?
Yes, I've always wanted to be a writer. It just took me a long time to get up the gumption to actually do it, I knew from the time I was certainly in the 4th, 5th grade that I wanted to write. And I did all those years, as a kind of a hobby or whatever, but I did other things for a living. And I did the private investigation work because I wanted to learn how it worked, because I wanted to write crime fiction. Mm-hmm. But it just got away on me, It becomes your job and you just do it for a while. And then I worked in television for a while. I did video editing and I wrote documentaries and children's shows and things. Again, I really wanted to write novels, but I did those and I made a living at it. And it wasn't until one day I woke up and I was 35 and I had a bunch of half-finished manuscripts, and I finally said to myself, "Look, dude, you've always said you wanted to be a writer, so either write and finish the damn thing and send it out, and the worst thing that happens is all the agents say, nope, it sucks, and you move on. But you don't want to be 80 years old and say, I never really tried it." Right. So I finally decided to just push through.
And what was the path to publication like for that first novel?
It was, I wish I could give some great inspirational story about having accumulated 500 rejections and all that. I had a bunch of rejections, but it was pretty easy. I sent out query letters and, got the Writer's Digest Guide to Literary Agents and looked in bookstores and libraries at books that were similar to mine to look who the author is thanking and the acknowledgments and find out their agents and submitted. And I think I had 23 rejections before I landed my first agent. And then...
Gotcha. What's the writing process like for you? Do you write extensive outlines? Do you write more organically? What's that?
Well, for my first 2 books, it was much less outlined than the third. I need to know where I'm headed, so I want to know the ending, and I want to know some tent pole scenes, if you will, because they hold up the tent of the plot. Maybe 5 or 10 important scenes that have to happen between the beginning and the end. But I'm open to changing them as the book gets written, and they do change. But I need at least that much structure. But I don't want much more because I want to be able to surprise myself. With the new book, I had outlined a little more because it's multiple points of view. I've got 4 different point of view characters, and it's a more complex plot. So I did a little more outlining, but I still like to leave that room for spontaneity,
Right. Given your experience thus far with publishing and writing, what tips or advice would you offer for aspiring writers?
Well, the world has changed so much and is changing so quickly. If I were starting now, I would probably do the same thing that I did the first time, trying to, get an agent and go the traditional route. But a lot of people are having a great deal of success with self-publishing, and I think that's also a valid way to go. But regardless of whether you're self-publishing or whether you're going after an agent, you got to make sure that the book is absolutely as good as you can make it before you send it out. People are in a rush often, and it's really important to have a group of beta readers, early readers, friends, family, people that you can give it to and you have to understand that they're friends and family, so they like you, so they want to be nice to you, but you have to find a group of people who will read it and give you honest advice. And then you've got to work it and work it and work it. And if it hasn't been rewritten a whole bunch of times and responding to notes from people who have read it, then it probably isn't ready. But once you are ready, then just go for it and do what you love. Write what you love. Don't try to worry about analyzing the market, about what will sell and all that, because nobody really knows.
Right. And your new book is published by Amazon, correct?
Yes, it's Thomas and Mercer, which is owned by Amazon.
Right. And what's that experience been like for you thus far?
It's been fabulous so far. They've been terrific to work with. The editor they assigned to work on it is Marjorie Bramman, and she edited Elmore Leonard and T. Jefferson Parker and Michael Crichton and Michael Gruber and all these. She's a legend in the business, and she was fabulous to work with, and she definitely helped me make it a better book. And so far, it comes out July 31st, but so far they've been really behind it. They've put a lot of effort in, and they're very. They work in very close cooperation with authors on things like cover design, and that doesn't always happen,
right?
But with them, so far it's been a terrific experience.
That's great. What books, fiction or nonfiction, have you read like in the last 6 to 8 months that really made an impression on you?
I just read I just read a book by a friend of mine. It's not out yet, but it's my friend Marcus Saki has a book coming out next year that I can't tell you about, but except look for it because it's fabulous. And the Aftertime series by Sophie Littlefield. I didn't know whether I would go for that because normally zombies and stuff are not my thing. My God, that was a fabulous series. Really, really well written. They both left a big impression on me.
That's great. What are you working on now?
Right now I'm working on The Devil's Game, which is the sequel to the Trinity Game. It's the middle book in the trilogy, and I'm almost finished, and it'll be out next year.
Great. And where can people find you online?
People can find me at www.chercover.com, which is my website, CHERCOV as in Victor, ER, chercover.com. But mostly I hang out on Twitter, and my handle is just Sean Chercover. It's just my name.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Sean Chercover, author of the new novel, The Trinity Game, which will be available in bookstores now. Sean, thanks for doing the interview.
Jeff, thanks very much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
Almost 90% of women have cellulite. And guess what? It's not their fault. We don't choose cellulite, but we can choose a different way to treat it. Meet Quo, collagenase Clostridium histolyticum, AAES, the first and only FDA-approved prescription injectable for moderate to severe cellulite in the buttocks of adult women. This non-surgical treatment is injected by an aesthetic specialist in 10 minutes or less. Individual results may vary. Do not receive if you are allergic to any collagenase or ingredients in Quo, or have an infection at the treatment site. May cause serious side effects, allergic reactions including anaphylaxis, and injection site bruising. Seek medical help right away for any signs of allergic hypersensitivity. Tell your doctor about all your medical conditions if you have a bleeding condition or take medicine that prevents clotting. Most common side effects include bruising, pain, hardness, itching, redness, discoloration, swelling, and warmth at the injection site. Ask your doctor about all possible side effects and for product information. If you're ready to get to the bottom of your cellulite, learn more and find a specialist at Quo.com.